Welcome back, everyone. So as part of the series where I go over my hardware and software, I will also now go over all of the libraries I use before I go over my template, because that's been a very frequent question. So this is gonna be a multi-part series, and I'm just gonna start at the top, which would be Woodwinds in my template. Now, disclaimer, I used to work for Cinesamples as a full-time staff member. I was also a full-time mock-up artist for a variety of composers here in Los Angeles. So that was actually my job for, I think, the first 3 years I was here in town. I've also helped out other sample library developers over time. So I've encountered my fair share of sample libraries over the past 8-9 years. So Woodwinds, and this is coming from a woodwind player, by the way. So my absolute favorite is Berlin Woodwinds by Orchestral Tools. I think that's the woodwind library to end all woodwind libraries, pretty much. The ease of use, the out-of-the-box pristine sound, the detail in the sampling, the detail in the editing process, the playability, I think all of these are far superior to any other woodwind library that I had the fortune or misfortune to work with. It's also, of course, the most expensive one out there, I think. But once you have this one, you won't need to buy another one. And for me, that's a big selling point. I'd rather invest in one big expensive product that is close to perfect than invest into multiple slightly cheaper products, but none of them really quite do the job. You probably don't need all the expansions. I think the basic library plus expansion A is going to do the trick for most people. It was recorded at Teldex in Berlin. It's a very well-known scoring stage in Germany. And as opposed to the competition, it comes with multiple instruments of each. So there are several flutes, several oboes, several clarinets, bassoons, etc. And they all sound different. So it's not like they sampled the same person twice or the same instrument twice. They really sound distinctively different from one another. And it's something that I've been missing about a lot of other woodwind libraries that just come with one soloist. So with this library, if you actually want 3 flutes playing, you can have 3 different flutes playing, as opposed to having one sampled flute and then, playing a chord into one flute patch, which is technically the same flute played 3 times, and you can kind of hear it. The scripting is great. I haven't had any issues with it. The editing is clean. Haven't had any issues with that either. The legatos sound very clean. I haven't had any egregious volume bumps or timing issues with the legatos at all. I haven't heard any noises or any bad loops in it, so no complaints on that side. It comes with a variety of mic positions as all higher-end libraries, but actually I haven't really had to touch any of them because the full mix just sounds so gorgeously balanced. I haven't looked up who recorded this, but whoever did a really great full mix, live mix. Whoever did that did a good job. The interface is, pretty. I mean, it doesn't really matter to me because I rarely look at this stuff. I usually set up the libraries the way I want them. I load them into my VE Pro Metaframe and then I don't touch them if I don't have to. So the interface design to me is not really a big selling point, so make of that what you will. But so Berlin Woodwinds is just an all-around great, well-produced, great-sounding library. I have absolutely no complaints about it. Then secondly, I'm of course using CineWinds. CineWinds was the first higher-end library that I had, the first higher-end Woodwind library that I had, because before that I had only been using the very old East-West Symphonic Gold XP, the one that still loads into Contact, so that is pre-Play Engine. And I had been working with that for a while, and then I got hired by Cinesamples and I got all the libraries for free. And so this was the first proper Woodwind library that I ever owned. It was recorded at the Sony scoring stage here in Los Angeles with really great players, with Dennis Sands as the engineer. If you don't know Dennis Sands, look him up. He's a veteran engineer and has probably worked on most of your favorite productions. All of the Cine series was recorded at the Sony scoring stage, so they all blend very nicely. But I think with CineWinds, this might actually have been a little bit of a drawback, because while Sony really flatters brass and percussion, it doesn't quite flatter woodwinds, I think, or at least not if you just put solo woodwinds into this gigantic hall. Their detail just gets lost in this massive space. And it's been one of my main issues with CineWinds, pretty much. One of the main customer complaints I remember was the noise floor, because you have these, tiny instruments in a massive hall. So, specifically softer articulations, it's just going to have so much noise floor on them. Because if you don't know, Sony was also not built as a recording, music recording space. It was just a soundstage where they were filming. And then it was kind of refunctioned. And also it's in the middle of two busy streets in Culver City. So sometimes when a truck drives by, you can actually hear it on the recording, like a low rumble. So it's not the most isolated hall. If you record a full orchestra, you're not going to hear any noises. It's fine. But if you're going to record a single flute in that hall, you're going to hear every tiny noise. Now, I think they fixed the noise floor problem in version 1.2. I only worked on version 1.1, and I haven't updated to 1.2. I wasn't working on that update, so I can't comment on that, but if they fixed it, great. But it's one of the few libraries where I constantly had to mute the full mix and actually use more close-mic'd positions to get a little bit of detail in, and even then it would still sound very diffuse and very wet, even though you're using the closer mic positions. So definitely one of the weaknesses of that library. It's lacking detail. It comes with some ethnics, at least the pro version does, I think. And some of them are great, some of them but definitely stuff like the Renaissance flute, Baroque flute, Irish flute, the Julian pipes, pretty much all the medieval stuff and all the Irish stuff really sounds great. While I worked there, we did an update and we added a second oboe that actually also sounds very different from the first oboe. But it kind of stopped there, unfortunately. I kind of had hope that they would also add a second flute and a second clarinet and all that stuff. I think actually they added a second clarinet. I think there's a clarinet in B flat and then a clarinet in E flat. But that's kind of it. I don't think there's a second bassoon or second flute or any of that. So I kind of wish they had stayed consistent with that and had just added a second to everything. And I also wish they had added more articulations, because they really just come with legatos and some basic shorts. I do like the programming and the script and the editing in general. It's very, very well done. The legatos can sound a bit wonky at times. There can be some timing issues or volume bumps. I would advise to just put the legato speed to max speed in order to kind of compensate for that and kind of mess around a little with the legato volume knob. But sometimes it also just works to turn the legatos off and it's gonna sound fine. The interface is the same as the entire Cine series. Some people think it's a bit cluttered. I actually like it because when I set up the library initially, I don't have to bother going too much into the Contact backend because they pull so many controls into the front, which makes it a bit cluttered. But then again, after I've set it up, I rarely ever go into the thing again because it just sits in my template somewhere on another machine in VE Pro. So not a big deal to me. So I'm just happy they put all that stuff in the front so I don't actually have to go into the back and work with a kind of 90s interface. So it's still a very, very solid woodwind library, but a very far off second to Berlin Woodwinds, I would think. And then thirdly, an oldie but goodie, I'm still using Hollywoodwinds sometimes, not all the time. Hollywoodwinds is different from these other two because it doesn't have soloists in it. It has an actual woodwind ensemble recorded. So they recorded a woodwind ensemble playing, tutti legatos as a section, or octaves as a section, or shorts, all kinds of... It's a very simple library for what it is. It has some effect stuff in it that is kind of nice. The reason I use it is because when you have a tutti section going in an orchestral piece and you want all the woodwinds to play like a woodwind section, sometimes you can have issues because all of these woodwinds were recorded separately, so they don't really attune to one another as they would in an orchestral setting, right? They can't really balance their sound with one another. So sometimes it sounds like you just have a bunch of soloists playing instead of having a section playing. So then what I like to do is layer in Hollywoodwinds, either the tutti patch or the octaves patch, to just kind of fill up the sound a little bit, and it kind of ties it together, which is quite nice. It's not a very resource-heavy library. It's really old. It's also not expensive, I think. It's not a very detailed library, but it doesn't have to be. That's not why it was made. So I find this to work really nicely as the glue between the soloists whenever I have a loud tutti orchestra section. As for other libraries I've encountered and worked with at other composer studios, I've never touched the Spitfire Woodwinds because I stopped doing mockups for other people before that came out, I think, so I've never encountered that. I did work with the sample modeling Woodwinds at some studios, and I really like them. They're really great for solo passages. They're not really great for, like, playing together with other woodwinds. But if you have a flute solo or clarinet solo or something, these are really nice sounding, I don't want to say samples because that's not necessarily what it's doing, but sample modeling is definitely nice for solo parts. I did use the woodwind ensemble patches from Symphobia for a while, but I kicked them out of my template because Hollywoodwinds was just better, and I don't need two of those. I did also use some ensemble woodwind patches from other Spitfire libraries like Albion and that stuff. Wasn't super taken by them, but they were fine. They were just okay. I did use the 8DO Claire woodwind bundle at some studios, which I actually really liked. They had a nice sound and the legatos were a bit wonky at times, but overall, I liked them. They were just a bit too incomplete for my needs, but definitely better than Fine Library. I never used the East-West Hollywood woodwinds because I stopped using East-West products before that came out. And there's not really a single professional studio that I have worked at that is using those, or that is really using East-West products at all, I think. I haven't seen any, despite the many quotes they have on their website from working professionals. But I think that's really more of a marketing ploy. They probably give free stuff to these composers in exchange for an endorsement. I've seen that happen firsthand, where some manufacturers, not just East-West, they will give free stuff to composers, and then in exchange they get a quote that they can put on their website. And then that composer never actually ends up using that library, but then their endorsement is on the website. I wouldn't really fall for that. So, whenever you see that kind of stuff on anyone's website, I'd be careful with that, because it's highly likely that those composers just got a freebie and said something nice in exchange. So that's it for the woodwinds. Next up is the brass. I hope you find this useful, and I'll be back shortly with the next orchestra section.